council will come to order. This is a budget workshop today, so please take a silent roll call. First up is the Pledge of Allegiance. Peggy McGowan, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance. United States of America. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number one, workshop to discuss the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. Mr. Neese.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, residents, and staff for your attendance at our third budget workshop. Similar to the last budget workshop, these are meant to be a conversation between staff and the council. Members of the public in attendance may also participate by completing a speaker form and handing it into the town clerk. The mayor will then call upon each of the speakers after the discussion. These are the respective topics that we'll discuss today. We're going to begin, as usual, by talking a little bit about the budget process for those that are new and following along at home. The foundation for the annual budget is based upon the council-approved strategic work plan, which contains 4 pillars: quality community development, fiscal sustainability, infrastructure management, and community engagement. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a future slide. At our last workshop, however, we collectively discussed the deliverables under each of these pillars this past fiscal year, and that workshop is available on our web site under the budget page. The budget planning process actually extends over a 6-month period of time, beginning in January and concluding in June. In January, staff begins to look at the trends and needs that may impact our annual budget. In February through early April, the town begins to forecast revenue figures based upon the available 6 months of the current fiscal year data. Inflationary increases to contracted services are received at this point in time, such as our law enforcement services with MCSO, and general organizational expenses are identified by town staff. Based upon this data, public workshops are held with the council throughout the spring to help mold our respective budget. In May, the tentative budget is considered, which establishes the bottom line expenditure figure for the next fiscal year. And finally, in June, the budget hearing is held to consider approval of the new fiscal year budget, which starts in July. At a high level, these are the 4 areas of focus in the next fiscal year budget: public safety, infrastructure investment, community development, and community engagement. Under public safety, we are budgeting for an increase in traffic patrol and collection of data through the use of solar speed signs to more efficiently and effectively focus law enforcement efforts. We are investing in fire equipment that has exceeded its useful life and reinvesting in the 20-year-old fire station. Under infrastructure, we are continuing our reinvestment in our streets, repairing drainage structures throughout the town, and continuing to reinvest in our downtown like most communities do. Under community development, we will seek ratification of the general plan and subsequent implementation items that might include our zoning ordinance and design guidelines and open space strategic plan. Under community engagement, we will expand stakeholder groups and explore topics such as the town gardens with a cross-section of interest. We'll be working towards digitizing our development service department and continue to build upon our digital communication platforms. The proposed annual budget allocates the funding to help achieve these respective results. Now let's take a deeper dive behind the numbers within our budget, beginning with forecasted revenues. At a broad level, we anticipate approximately $8 million in revenue over the next fiscal year. The main contributor to this revenue is our municipal sales tax. The percentage of the community's dependency on sales tax is increasing each year as our state shared revenue is anticipated to decrease, while our cost recovery fees remain pretty consistent with historical levels. More specifically, 62%, or approximately at least $5 million, is anticipated from municipal sales tax. State shared revenue is projected to be about $1.8 million, or 22% of the town's operational revenue. And the cost recovery user fee is forecasted at approximately $1.26 million, or 16% of the town's overall $8 million operational revenue. The next series of slides drill down into each one of these revenue streams, beginning with our largest, our municipal sales tax. In 2006, that's the year that we initiated the master contract with Rural Metro. In order to pay for that, we increased our sales tax from, at that time, 2% upwards to 3%. Over the 18 years that followed that, the average municipal sales tax collection was $3.62 million, or $1.2 million per each 1%. However, over the last 5 years, this total sales tax collection has been up significantly, averaging about $5 million, or about $1.66 million each 1%. Sales tax obviously tracks with the economic conditions and the performance of local businesses, and is also subject to legislative initiatives. This slide illustrates the trends in municipal sales tax. So over the last 10 years, approximately $40 million was collected in municipal sales tax. More than half that revenue comes from two sources: retail at 37% and construction at 16%. When compared to last year's figures, both these categories are declining. The reduction of retail can in part be attributed to the increase in online sales that has doubled over the past 10-year average, and the loss of CVS Pharmacy, while the decline in construction sales tax is a result of state legislator recalibration of construction tax payments. It's important to note that declining construction sales tax, as these one-time revenues build, the town's capital reserve funds for the street projects will be reduced. This pattern of declining construction sales tax will lead to a declining balance of the capital reserve fund, and as we continue to invest in our streets. Two areas of growth are centered around hospitality. The two categories that feed into this are restaurants and bars, as well as accommodations. Last year, the revenue has more than doubled the amount collected during each of the previous 10 years. This growth can be attributed to the new hotel in the town center. The indirect benefit of this hotel is the spin-off of consumer traffic the hotel creates for nearby restaurants and bars, which has seen a modest increase over the 10-year collections. This highlights the benefit and growth that can be attributed to hospitality, given its position as an economic driver in the Arizona economy. An additional category to highlight is rentals. As we've discussed publicly in the past, the state legislator eliminated residential long-term rental tax, which will negatively impact this revenue stream and further illustrates the legislative risk to the town's limited revenue model. The 5-year revenue figures per category on the left side of this slide further reaffirms these trends, showing retail and construction as the leading contributors and the growth in the hospitality sector and internet sales, while the other categories, which are lesser contributors, remain relatively constant with the historical values and have a limited amount of growth. That being said, any questions associated with our municipal sales tax and the forecasting of the municipal sales tax?
So I have one question. On the rentals, what contributes to the rental segment?
So essentially two components: residential and commercial. Moving forward, it's just commercial. It's not long-term residential. So the reduction that we received or we see over the previous 10-year average, a 3% reduction, is attributed to the state legislative changes that eliminated the residential tax on long-term rentals.
So like StoreQuest, is that in that piece
That
of the
is
pie?
not, no.
Where does that appear?
That would be under commercial rentals. So once again, two attributes. Rentals includes two attributes, two categories. It included commercial and included residential. Now it only includes commercial. So StoreQuest would fall under the rental category because it's a commercial rental. But apartments do not, or condos that are rented out long-term do not anymore. They once did up until last year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Just to clarify, that excludes short-term rentals.
That does. That is correct. Moving on to user fees or cost recovery fees. They are charges town typically assesses for services provided by staff and helps to offset approximately 2/3 of staff's compensation. The majority of these fees come through permitting process and permits for utilities for improvements within our rights-of-way. Additionally, the town of Cave Creek pays Carefree a fee to offset the operational costs of the courts, as well as fines received from those found guilty of a violation. In total, the town is projecting approximately $1.26 million, which is comparable to years past. So this is not increasing, it's remaining consistent. In the future, we'll revisit our fees that we assess through our permitting process to see if we need to recalibrate them. But typical, we receive about $1.26 million for our overall cost recovery fees. Any questions associated with cost recovery fees? All right, moving forward, state share revenue is the final third of our revenue stream model, and it's composed of 4 categories: a proportional share of the state income tax, state sales tax, vehicle license tax, highway user revenue fees, and over the last 5 years, all those revenues collectively together, if we aggregate them together, range anywhere between 1.5 upwards to $2 million. Over this next year, we will begin to realize the financial impacts to the 2.5% flat tax, the income tax that was instituted by the legislator approximately a year and a half ago, with approximately $200,000 reduction to the state income tax proportion to Carefree. There is a slight increase to our proportional share of state shared revenue state shared sales tax by about 2.5%. Both the vehicle license tax and the highway user revenue funds are remaining pretty consistent with the historical values. In all, we're forecasting about $1.8 million to be collected through state shared revenue, these respective 4 categories aggregated together. Any questions about the state shared revenue?
Just an observation. So even though the numbers stay relatively flat, inflation goes up. So that flat number is actually has less buying power than it did 2 years ago.
That is correct, yes. All right. Now let's switch gears a little bit, and on the other side of the table, those are our overall revenues, pretty simple and straightforward. Now let's start going into expenses. There are 2 parts of our expenses: our annual operations and our capital projects. We'll start focusing first on our anticipated annual operation expenses. This is the town's organizational chart. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. 5 departments: public safety, administrative services, community development, public works, and the municipal court. These services are what's considered fundamental core municipal services provided by local government. These fundamental local government responsibilities include administering financial management, risk management, records retention and intergovernmental relations, communication, all the role of the administrative department. The oversight of planning documents, zoning, building codes, which impact how property is developed and used over time, is administered through the community development department. Managing and maintaining public property such as our streets, culverts, public facilities, and amenities is the task of our public works department. The enforcement of laws that govern community well-being, as well as our fire emergency medical services, is the role of our public safety services. And finally, our municipal court presides over misdemeanor violations both within the town of Carefree as well as Cave Creek. You might recall a number of years ago, 10 years to be more specific, we consolidated the court with Cave Creek, and that IGA that I wrote is now used by the Arizona court system to consolidate other courts throughout the state of Arizona. So it's something that we should be proud of, a point of pride for both communities. The town staff has been focusing on addressing the core tasks within the strategic work plan. These 4 tasks are outlined in the respective columns here. Once again, we went through those core tasks. As presented in the last month's budget workshop, staff has made significant progress in each one of these core tasks, and we outline what we achieved this past year in that past workshop. This fall, after the council election, a new strategic plan session will be held with the incumbents, outgoing and incoming council members to discuss an update to this strategic plan and will act as a foundation for future budget discussions. So let's focus a little bit more on the numbers. The overall operational expenses for this next fiscal year are forecasted to be approximately $7.3 million. Of that $7.3 million, as typical, public safety remains the largest percentage at 40%. This is followed by human resources and operational expenses at slightly more than a quarter apiece, and finally risk management at approximately 5%. The next series of slides will take a deeper look into each one of these percentages. Beginning with public safety, the largest cost center in the town's operational budget. The two are divided in two parts: law enforcement services provided through a contract with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, and then the fire emergency service contract provided through a master contract with Rural Metro. Of the approximate $2.9 million invested in public safety, approximately 2.2 is proportioned to fire and emergency medical services, and approximately $700,000 to law enforcement services. From a law enforcement perspective, we are budgeting for an increase in traffic patrol to address once again the residents' concern over calming traffic passing through the community. As the MCSO commander has stated in our previous council meeting, MCSO, like all law enforcement agencies, are facing staffing shortages, and such commitment is based upon availability from a funding perspective. However, we must commit the funding in the budget to facilitate the desired level of services. Therefore, the budget shows an increase in part to fund this additional level of service, but we will work with Rural Metro to actually fill that position. And we've had communications with both our county supervisor as well as the new sheriff to help fulfill that. Under law enforcement, we also include our incarceration fees. We typically budget about $16,500 each year. Typically, it's below that amount. Those fees are reimbursed by the bad actors who are fined, and they reimburse us for those incarceration fees. We also have a contract, like all communities, with animal control through the county. That remains fairly constant at about $2,500. From a fire emergency medical service perspective, the contract with Rural Metro has an inflationary increase of 2.5% over the next 3 years of the contract. This brings the contract price this next fiscal year to $1.9 million. The current contract, once again, will be expiring in 3 years, and at that point in time, the contract base price as well as this annual inflationary index increase will need to be negotiated. And it's also important to note that the parent company of Rural Metro, GMR, has been entertaining offers on the sale of Rural Metro, and the town will need to be mindful of changes of potential new ownership may bring to the future contract position and pricing. In addition to the contract, there are various pieces of equipment that, as I suggested earlier, is approaching its useful life and needs to be replaced, such as a compressor which fills the breathing apparatus and some gas meters. This equipment replacement totals approximately $114,000. Additionally, the fire station is approaching approximately 2 decades of use. Some of the appliances, such as the ice maker and paint and flooring repairs, will need to be addressed. These items total approximately $135,000. Finally, included in the overall budget for fire emergency services are fuel and general maintenance. We still have maintenance on the new apparatus, oil changes and filters, for example. So just general maintenance associated with that we typically budget every year. Any questions associated with public safety?
I'm just looking at this, the second line under fire and emergency services, office equipment, building maintenance. So in '23 it was 2,100, then it was 2,600, and now we're looking at 121,000. So
Correct.
What is that?
So that would include essentially some new flooring in the bunkhouses and new painting to the interior of the firehouse. If you've done any home improvement projects these days, you will begin to appreciate what the costs are and the shortage of labor that's out there. So it all affects the cost of these contracts. So some of those, there's some other things baked into that number to facilitate some of the concerns of the firefighters there, but most notably it's the painting and the replacement of the floors. We also have some of the fixtures that need to be replaced, some of the chairs, and I outlined the ice maker, which is a pretty significant piece of equipment. It's a commercial ice maker. It's not your typical conventional ice maker in your refrigerator. So, yeah. So all these things cost a lot of money. All right. Moving on to human resources. Human capital is the most important element to any organization. Finding the right people and compensating them at the appropriate levels is certainly a science. As the compensation study clearly defined, we have a nimble organization and compensate the employees within appropriate ranges. That study that presentation is on our budget web page. So anybody at home that wants to review that in detail from that consultant can click on that link and listen to that respective presentation. Of the $7.3 million operating budget, a little more than a quarter of these funds go towards staff compensation, or approximately $2 million. The municipal court has requested a new part-time position to assist in the timely processing of the court's paperwork. Otherwise, staffing levels remain consistent at a total of 16 full-time employees. These figures include a 5% increase for our health insurance. If we went out onto the free market, that would be much, much more than that. Luckily, we're part of a insurance pool of like communities, rural communities, and we have buying power, and we can buy down our respective rates. It also includes a 5% COLA merit increase for the respective employees. Any questions with human resources? All right, moving on to operational funds. They also make up about a quarter of the town's operational costs. These expenses are including but not limited to under management, all the utility costs for public facilities, maintenance contracts, governmental fees, annual organizational dues, technology subscriptions, and I could go on. Under clerk, the annual audit fees, accounting software updates, and electronic filing database. Under communications, it includes digital media, website hosting, the 40th anniversary celebration that we'll have this fall, holiday events, printed media, social media, supporting graphics, software services supporting the graphics. Under planning and zoning, completion of the general plan, and hopefully the initiation of implementation items, which include but are not limited to zoning design guidelines, fee schedules, and hopefully an open space strategic plan for the community. Under building safety, a contractual service with Brown & Associates. Brown & Associates provide our services for building official, plan review, and planning inspection from a building safety perspective. We are looking also at purchasing digital permitting software so that one can go online and check the status of their permit or their inspections and not be in town to do that. So it will alleviate a burden by trying to play phone tag with staff and make sure that you catch them and they can just go online and go into their account and check the status of their respective project. Under economic development, we have a subscription for data services and some marketing material. Under code enforcement, we have short-term rental database management system supporting documentation to assist addressing any code violations. And under engineering, typical governmental compliance requirements such as dust control and MS4, preparation of bid specifications and details, survey work, and design work for drainage repairs. Under Public Works, maintenance of our 4-acre garden, significant costs associated with any public facility, and our gardens, there's significant costs associated with that, including our restrooms. Supplies and materials and equipment rental and maintenance, purchase of a new message board and traffic cones to ensure the safety of the Public Works staff when they're working within the right-of-way, and also the replacement of a old striping machine that has lived its useful life. And finally, under the municipal court, supporting software and supplies and materials that we purchased through the AOC, the Administrative Office of the Court. So that being said, we have about $1.95 million in overall supplies, materials, software, utilities, et cetera, so forth, over this next fiscal year. Any questions from a operational perspective? The final component of the town's annual budget, operational budget, is risk management. And there's two components to this: legal services and insurance. Under legal services, we contract with law enforcement, a law firm that specializes in municipal law, and that's Fitzgibbons. And if a specialist is needed during the course of the year, we also budget for a specialized legal counsel. Additionally, we contract out for town prosecutor services, and that's through Bustamante, which specializes in those respective services. Under insurance services, the town, like over 70 other local Arizona communities, pools their resources and has formed an insurance pool through a entity called Southwest Risk. And so once again, this is like communities working together to create buying power and then create the unique coverages that cover our risk associated with performing our business as local governments. So this is fundamentally the most economical way of providing that and ensure that our interests are protected. So overall risk management, we're looking at approximately 5% of our cost, or $370,000. Any questions associated with risk management?
Gary, what all insurance coverage is all that cover? Is that medical? Is it for life, health?
That is not associated with the employees. So it's not associated with health care. Yes, it's not vision or dental. It's associated with the risk portfolio of the town conducting business. So it's land use, it's our right-of-way, it's somebody out on a piece of equipment and gets into an accident. So it covers all the risk associated with that. So there's a lot of unique risk associated with the business that we're in public service, and it covers all those respective liabilities. As I discussed earlier, there's two areas of expenses: operational and capital improvements. Just summarize the overall operational costs of approximately $7.3 million for the town. As typical, we have a $200,000 budget contingency, which brings that total to $7.5 million. Now let's focus on the other side of the table, which is our capital expenditures, which essentially is an investment in maintaining our aging infrastructure. Over this next fiscal year, we anticipate about $5.8 million being invested in our aging infrastructure. These investments fall into 4 categories: drainage, traffic safety, street maintenance, and the town center. So let's zero into some of these respective areas. Beginning with drainage. Over time, varying storm events contribute to the deterioration of our wash street interface. Obviously, a lot of these washes come in and intersect our respective streets. And there's cut-off walls, there's culverts, things that over time are compromised. And we have to incrementally address some of these compromised areas to protect our streets and minimize larger costly repairs. Additionally, we are required to conduct sampling of our washes to monitor and address any pollutants that might filter into our washes. These sampling kits will need to be replaced and inspected periodically. That's part of our MS4 requirements. so there's an expense, annual expense associated with that. So we're looking at about a little bit over 900,000 budgeted for our drainage improvements. With the recent accidents within the community and residents' concern over calming traffic, both short and long-term efforts are being made. The short-term efforts deal with addressing the behavior of the bad actors through law enforcement, while the long-term efforts will evaluate the efficiency and safety of the roadway designs and intersections. From a short-term perspective, collecting data to assist with traffic enforcement permits MCSO to address appropriate periods of enforcement and more efficiently and effectively deploy their resources. Long-term, we are working with MAG and adjacent jurisdictions to study the traffic patterns and design solutions with the assistance of the community. So there will be community dialogue behind these respective design solutions to address the street geometrics and intersection geometrics. Further, to calm the traffic that everybody's complaining about. Additionally, we have bid the pedestrian crosswalk improvements on Tom Darlington this past fall. Unfortunately, we did not receive any bidders. This project is currently out to bid, and approximately 60% of the funding is coming in through a grant through MAG. That grant is still there, so we are looking at other bidders, and hopefully we'll receive a response sometime this spring. We will continue with our street maintenance program with a mill and overlay to Tom Darlington and the western sections of Cave Creek Road, as well as some sections in the Highlands area that are compromised and we need to lay some new asphalt. In addition, we will continue with the replacement of some of our faded street signs. You might recall we had an inventory of all our signs throughout town, and we're incrementally budgeting to replace these signs, so it improves the reflective quality of these signs, especially at night. We are working towards continuing our investment in our town gardens with electrical repairs, landscape and sidewalk repairs, amphitheater chair replacements, replacing failing holiday lights, and improvements to signage, and perhaps even some improvements to additional parking areas. Collectively, these are the capital improvements to maintain our aging infrastructure, protect property, ensure public safety, reinvest within our community spaces, and further improve the high quality of life enjoyed by Carefree residents. Any questions associated with the capital improvement projects being proposed for this year?
Jared?
Yes.
The neighborhood program, is that a program where we're sending materials, education materials out to all the citizens regarding safety issues and so forth?
No, good question there. So the $15,000 that's allocated in the neighborhood program is part of our traffic calming program that was adopted this past fall. We had a series of workshops with the community. Our past town engineer worked through the conversation with the community. We developed a policy, and associated with that policy, we would set aside $15,000 to partner with local neighborhoods to deal with traffic calming issues within those neighborhoods. So it's a collective effort. We're asking for those neighborhoods to also have skin in the game in association with that policy, and then to collaborate with their neighbors, because obviously whatever these things are, they affect everybody within that neighborhood, in that general area, and we want to have broader discussions associated with those improvements. We're always in the uncomfortable position where people come to us with their complaints and want it addressed immediately. And obviously whatever we do impacts other folks. So we're trying to have, in this case with these neighborhood issues and complaints about calming traffic within respective residential streets, a collaboration with those residents, putting some money aside for that respective program to support those neighborhoods, and having those neighbors talk to the greater neighborhood to ensure that whatever's being suggested there, there's buy-in in that respective neighborhood. So that's what that speaks of, that $15,000.
Are you working through the HOAs?
That would be done through HOAs, and in case where there isn't an HOA, it would be done through just working through the residents of that local neighborhood.
And if I may, what is a flock
Yep.
something? What is that?
So flock cameras are being deployed throughout the metropolitan area. There's some in Cave Creek, others in Phoenix, others in Scottsdale. When we had the unfortunate circumstance of the fatal accident here at Pima and Cave Creek Road, one of the pieces of evidence that was used to track the vehicle that unfortunately hit this person was through the flock cameras. And so there were pictures of that vehicle that was shared on newscasts and eventually wound up leading to the bad actor that killed this person. So our part of the equation is we don't have them. They're helpful tool used in the law enforcement industry today to collect data and catch these bad actors passing through any one community.
So are we
So it's our
installing-
part of that. So it would be buying the assets, and then there's a annual subscription service. So this is all part of that program.
That's an acquisition
Yes,
cost.
yes,
So we're
both.
gonna be installing
Acquisition and subscription.
and
Yep.
subscription. Okay, very good. And you've made, has a determination made where to place those? can be?
Not at this point in time. That's something that we would have to work through.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question. Will the future parking plans impact the pedestrian crossing here? Are we potentially reworking Tom Darlington again when we think about additional parking?
It should not, those crosswalks will remain in the same location. You probably will not be crossing as much asphalt in the future if there's changes in the circulation, but essentially the crosswalk itself, the location of those would remain, and the hardware that supports those crosswalks would remain. The biggest cost associated with those is essentially the hardware that supports the visibility of the pedestrian. So those would be adapted to any change within that crosswalk. So if you narrow the width of the asphalt, those could be relocated on either side of that respective crosswalk. So it's still assets that we're getting through a grant with MAG, and then we can repurpose them and reuse them at the same crosswalk.
Great.
Good questions. All right, between the operational costs and the capital improvement budget, the overall expenses anticipated for this next fiscal year are approximately $13.3 million, about a 7% reduction from last fiscal year. When we exempt expenditures are removed from these expenses, the budget is approximately $375,000 below the town's annual expenditure limit for this next fiscal year. That annual expenditure limit is approximately $12.9 million. Based upon these numbers, a draft budget narrative will be released as early as tonight and should be available on the budget webpage of the town's website. We will also be broadcasting that through a electronic digital newsletter release as well, either tonight or later on tomorrow morning. Still trying to format stuff on the budget, but hopefully that will be done in a timely fashion. And at our next budget workshop next Tuesday, April 30th, staff will be available to go through the program-based budget and answer any questions that the council and the community might have. That will be the last of the 4 budget workshops. The next step after the last budget workshop would be our May 7th meeting, in which we adopt the bottom line or the tentative budget, and then we move forward to the budget hearing, which takes place at 4:30 at our regular council meeting on June 4th. Yes, June 4th. So that being said, Mayor, members of council, that's a snapshot of the proposed budget, and be glad to address any additional questions that you might have. And if you receive any completed forms from the public, now's the time also to call upon the public.
So when we, by tomorrow morning or later tonight, we'll have some, a detailed report
Yes.
available to us, and
Yes.
we can sift through that and then really get into the weeds of what's being proposed next Tuesday. Okay.
Just one, you probably told me this before, but is the expenditure limit something that ratchets up each year at a fixed rate, as opposed to a previous ratio that you have to calculate?
Yes, there's a inflationary index to that. We have a permanent base adjustment. Those expenditure limits were adopted in 1979-80, and some communities have a home base rule in which every year, for example, the town of Cave Creek, when they approve their budget, that approves their statutory expenditure limit. So if you apply the calculation, their expenditure limit would be a fraction of what they're spending today. With Carefree, our expenditure limit is what's called a permanent base adjustment. And that was adjusted back in the late 90s and added $1 million to the overall calculation that was established back in 79-80. And then incrementally every year there's an inflationary index applied to that base year expenditure limit. So right now with our $1 million in addition to the inflationary index since 1979, our expenditure limit this year is 12 million. 12.9 million.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the council? Do we have any slips? No slips? Okay. You have to fill out a slip if you wish to speak. Please fill out a slip and do it right. Okay, come on up. Thank you.
Okay. Colleen Rose Skirty, resident of Carefree. I just have a question, because you were just saying that you'll get a detailed report before you guys vote on it, which is great. Is that detailed report available, like, for the residents to see?
It'll be, when it's posted for us to see, it'll be posted for you to see, so maybe by the end of today.
Okay,
Or at
so
least
there were
it-
certain things in there that, like, you see the lump sum, but the detail will be in that, so then we can question about that before.
Exactly, and we can question it as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have no additional slips. Is there any additional questions from council?
Mayor, members of council, our past budget narratives, our program-based budget for the past fiscal years are online too. So you go to our budget website and you can see the format of our budget follows what most other communities do. And so it's the typical format for the budget. So if one wants to see the typical format, they could just click on the past budgets, which are also posted online.
Very good, thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, so we can just adjourn. Oh, motion, okay, a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks all for coming out.